Are you a grower? Are you tired of lugging around too many bottles? Is it too expensive? Is it so confusing? Tired of reading feed charts? Well, guess what? There is an easier way. Introducing the Stash Blend. You can now get your bag of Stash Blend premium additives that you can add to your garden using just about any base nutrients. Go to stashblend.com and get your order today. And a huge shout out to AC Infinity. AC Infinity's got a brand new bowl trimmer, and you're going to want to get your hands on this. I harvested an entire pound in just a couple hours. I didn't have a sore back. It was easy on my feet, and boy, was it fast. Don't hesitate. Go to acinfinity.com. Use promo code THESTASH15. Save a few dollars off at checkout, and thank them for being a sponsor of today's video.
Hey
Boys,
what's up,
good
fellas?
to see you.
What's going on?
From the Stash Podcast, we are back.
We are,
And we are
man.
here.
Feels
Mr.
good to be
Grower,
back.
Pigeon420, me, Rob, just Rob.
Rob, ROB CLtv, baby.
How you guys doing on this lovely day?
That's wonderful, man. Doing great. Let's say it's Sunday, because that's the time that the podcast will
Lovely
release.
Sunday.
It's a beautiful Sunday, isn't it?
Unless you're on
Right.
Patreon, then you saw this a little early. Shout out to those who support the channel, patreon.com/fromthestash. Those are the number one sponsors of the brand. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to continue to do this content for free. So really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, appreciate
Thanks,
the
guys.
supporters that are in, specifically the VIP and premium, which we are going to roll across the screen right now. If you are in one of those categories, you get credits, show credits. Every single show now, you get credits on it, and appreciate your support there.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So,
man.
I don't know about you fellas. I know myself, we're getting into this season. It's a little bit chilly for me. And it's always cold for me. I'm in Michigan. It's
Hold my
only
beer.
warm for a few months. I know it's worse for you. But I've been having, and it could just be the kind of water I have, but I've been having a lot of fluctuation in my water quality, we'll say. And it's not just my what's in the water, so to speak, the TDS or the PPMs or ECs, but my pH has been different. Out of the tap, well, after using the I'm using the, not blue light filter, blue boogie brew filter. I'm hitting like 8.4 my pH, man. It's too high. Even when I'm going with the organic soil, I just feel like it's too high. I know there could be a buffer in there to take care of it. Do you guys deal with pH or PPM? Do you ever focus on those things at all?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like I have a really good water system in my town, and I don't have to focus on pH at all. And it's been years, and I'm very fortunate for that. But monitoring my
Lucky.
parts per million, yeah, I'm very lucky because prior to having a good water system, we were very high in pH and in parts per million. And now that we have a system that's regulated, we are a very stable pH with a very, very low parts per million. So I'm very thankful for that. Very thankful for that. But of course, you got to pay attention to your parts per million because, younger plants aren't going to take as many parts, so as much nutrients. Food as something that's going to be maybe a little later in veg and flower. And of course, your parts per million will change based on what you're feeding it and what those parts are made of. So yeah, something I keep in mind. You still pay attention to that stuff, Chris?
Yeah, well, I think, taking a step back and looking at big picture, I think we can all agree that pH and the nutrition, whether it be the ions, whether you're measuring EC or PPM, that's important, right? I think every grower can agree that it's important. Now, whether or not it's monitored is a different one, right? Like there's people who say it's not important to monitor both those things, or it is important to monitor both of those things. And I think it really breaks down between if you're growing with organic inputs or if you're growing with like synthetic bottled nutrients. You have more people on the organic side being like, I don't pay attention to any of that. The root system takes care of it. The microbes take care of it. So I don't need to monitor the pH. I don't need to monitor the EC or PPM. The breakdown is going to happen from the organic inputs, and the plant's going to uptake it. And there's some people that still do monitor the pH and EC PPM. I personally, if I'm running across like an issue, I might check the pH or PPM, whether it be a runoff test, slurry test, so on and so forth, just to see if I can identify a problem. Maybe there's a lack of nutrition in there. Maybe the pH is out of range. But for the most part, I'm not really monitoring, like measuring the pH and PPM. I was born and raised on PPM. I know when we talk about EC, PPM, pretty much the same thing. Just kind of a PPM is a calculation of EC. But yeah, I'm only really monitoring that growing with organic inputs if I come across a problem. On the synthetic side of things, if I'm using bottles, I'm paying a lot closer attention to the pH, PPM, and that's more of a precision way of feeding the plant, right? Feeding plant versus feeding the soil with the mineral based. It's in a form that the plant can uptake. Technically, you're kind of feeding the plant, not really feeding the soil at that point. But yeah, again, I think we can all agree that it is important. It's just a matter of whether or not we think it's important to monitor. And I think that comes down to what way you are growing.
Well, I think what's important is like for the people who are newer growers, we'll say, or new to this game, we'll say, what are all these letters? pH, PPM, EC, TDS. Let's just break down a little bit. And I should have got a note for this one, but Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. pH stands for potential of hydrogen.
Okay. Yeah, power of hydrogen potential. It's a measure of hydrogen ions in the soil.
Okay, cool. So that's good. I do have some notes right here, actually. So that's where it measures the acidity or the alkalinity of the solution, and that would be in your roots, really, or the water, or the soil, the media. Now, that being a scale of 0 to 14, for the most part, 7 is going to be neutral, and below 7 is acidic. Above 7 is going to be alkaline. Now,
alkalytic.
So how a plant uptakes those nutrients, that's the big thing, that's where pH is an issue. If your pH isn't regulated, it's not going to uptake those nutrients. And that's how they play alongside the PPM or EC, the electrical conductivity. So without those kind of being dialed in, you're going to have issues on one or the other. And they can definitely play a massive, massive part in the success of your plant. Now, not having the nutrient availability is huge. When you're in an organic soil, oftentimes you'll have a buffer that'll take care of the adjustment of that pH. But my water's at like almost pushing 9. So I still am trying to bring it down a little bit before I go into that mix. I'm just using craft blend with stash blend bars. And currently I'm still seeing a little bit of stress sometimes when I go just straight water. So I've been dropping my pH closer to 6.5. And I've been seeing better results. And I think that's because, again, that nutrient availability, also with the microbes, they're going to thrive more at a certain range. And if they're lower, it could harm the microbes. So I don't want to ruin the life that I have in that soil, ruin my battery by just being a little lazy with it. So luckily, I've recently, grab it right here. Shout out AC Infinity, shameless plug, sent me out their new all-in-one pH and PPM meter, and it's been really helpful because I've had 2 separate ones. I use Apera, which look very, very similar. Shout out to Apera, also great company. If they're related, then we got lucky because now it's got AC Infinity branding and backing with quality technology. But by having the all-in-one meter, that's changed the game for me because I could do it all with one device instead of having to take all that extra time. And this is the argument of doing the organic feeding versus synthetic, or getting the pH perfect nutrients so you don't got to deal with all this stuff, because it does become a hassle for those having to treat your water, or if you don't have perfect water like P, or have nice well water. I live in the outskirts of a city and the water sucks here, and Flint's not too far.
Yeah. Being cautious of your water is definitely, when someone is definitely a high priority. When someone comes to me with an issue, they will present me with a picture of a plant and say, "Pigeons, what's going on?" And typically, I always say, if you've got an issue, you start at your basics, back to basics. What's your basics? Well, going back to doing the things that you probably don't do anymore. Checking your runoff. Why are you checking your runoff? You want to see what kind of nutrients are coming out of the plant. Is what going in is what's coming out, and is the pH too high or too low? Is it too alkalytic? Is it too acidic? And generally speaking, when someone has a problem, it's aligned with either a pH issue, a parts per million issue. Either it's not enough parts per million, or it's too many parts per million. And so generally I would say I can troubleshoot most problems by just referring back to the medium. What's your pH? What's your parts per million? Keeping track of is very important. I remember it was hard concept for me to understand, and you kind of touched on it when you mentioned this scale. parts per million, or the pH, or the potential of hydrogen, is it's a scale. And you said 0 to 14. And if you list all your nutrients in a line next to that, so you got zinc, boron, calcium, potassium, you name it, and you've got them all lined up. And at 7, you get the most range of nutrients. So you're able to consume, as the plant takes up nutrients, a mass or a variety, all of those nutrients. If it's too far to one side, you're not getting this half of the nutrient scale. If it's too far to this side, you're not getting this half. If it's in the middle, you're getting a little bit of everything. And there's a ton of meters, and maybe our editor could throw one up on the scale of a pH meter scale showing the nutrients. But once you understand that, it makes a lot more sense, the importance of pH and how you can apply it in your garden. And then, of course, measuring your salt buildups with EC is a different thing, or is a different scenario.
One of the downsides about those pH charts you mentioned with all the nutrients and where they're available and so on and so forth is there's so many that vary online. You look at one and it's different from the other, and it's different from the other, and then you find out that it's focused by plant. This plant and then this plant. So it's like, oh man, so it's hard to like refer people over to that. I know, like when I first started growing, I was told the general range, if you're growing in soil, is to stay in between 6 and 7 pH. If you're in hydro, 5.5 to 6.5 pH. Now, there are many people that go outside of that range. There may be people that narrow down that range even more specific. In soil, a lot of people love that 6.5. Every single time they feed in nutrients, they're making sure their solution is at 6.5 going in. And some people just ignore that runoff measurement. Other folks are going to primarily look at that runoff measurement and kind of use that to determine, next time they water, what the pH should be. Sometimes if they feel like the pH is maybe in the high fives, they might water in at like 6.7 and hope that they see an adjustment upwards towards that 6.5 sweet spot, for example. So there are a lot of ways to kind of go about it, and people do various things in order to try to adjust the pH in the medium. Now, kind of narrowing down things to even more specifics, the plant's roots has what's called a rhizosphere. It's the outermost layer of the root. It's a section that's about 1 to 3 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where a lot of the pH really matters. And some people say, oh, you're making adjustments to the water, you're making adjustments to the medium. The runoff measurement isn't going to be the measurement of what the rhizosphere is. So there's a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion, debate, so on and so forth. But one thing to keep in mind is that the plant actually releases acids in order to adjust the pH in the rhizosphere. So, for example, if iron, let's take iron for example, right? Iron in a higher pH, I think it's above 6.5, maybe towards 7 or even higher. It's not in a form that the plant can actually uptake. So it'll release an acid, hydroxide, and it will actually convert that into a form. It'll lower the pH, convert that to a form that the plant can actually uptake. So things like that are happening. Way beyond my knowledge, a couple things I know about that. But long story short, the pH in the rhizosphere is said to be the most important. There's a lot of debate whether or not the pH in the medium really matters, if we should be, monitoring the runoff or slurry, and there's a lot of stuff there. So
I think those are like lung room conditions. Those are like your outer layer. And if that's really off, then the inner layer is going to be really off. You know what I'm saying? Point. I think that's the easiest bro science explanation would be, if your soil is wonky in terms of your pH is way too high and you've maybe potentially have some salt buildups in there, well, most likely your root zone is not going to be any better. It'll probably be worse. And same thing if it's slightly out. Like let's say you do the slurry test, which that used to be the go-to method, whether you were in cocoa or in soil. Slurry test was the method. It doesn't give you the exact measurement of your roots. And in order to get the soil or the media that's around your roots, you potentially could damage your roots. So there are soil testing meters. And some people will, say those aren't the best too because you're damaging your roots as you're poking through into there. But if you're running into issues, in my opinion, that would probably be the first thing to check, would be looking at the soil or the media pH over anything else. Even in the old Hey Abby, their nutrients don't hold up in terms of keeping that pH range from adjusting, from having a drift. So after 2 or 3 days, I noticed that the plant's looking a little wonky, a little yellowy. I'm like, huh. I checked the water, and of course, I'm at 7.2 now versus 5.8, and it shot up within a few days. That swing directly to the roots, because we're not in soil, there's nothing around that. It's direct to water to roots. It's going to shock the plant more. As where when you're in soil, you can catch that a little earlier on because you're going to see before it damages your roots too much. Your plant's going to give you those signs, and you could potentially attack it in the right way. So what are some things that you guys have dealt with in the past when it comes to PPM or pH? Have you done any sort of manipulation, like any sort of high fertigation, high frequency fertigation, or crop steering at all with pH or with PPM? So it might be a little deeper of a subject, commercial side of things, but I have bro science pH, unless you guys have something.
No, I mean, for me, one thing I'd say real quick is that I used to really monitor or adjust the pH of my water going in. Even with it being RO water, I live in an area where the PPM here and is nearly 500. It's really not good. A lot of sodium and bicarbonates. I can't use my tap water here. I have to filter it. I use an RO filter. Strips almost everything down. And I used to actually, use a pH adjuster and adjust it down. But then I've come to learn that, with not many ions there, you don't really have to adjust it. At least that's what I'm told. It doesn't make much of an impact. So I figured I mentioned that one for those that are filtering out their water and maybe doing RO. But no, as far as adjusting the pH and trying to crop steer, no, not much really.
Yeah, I thought I was
far too commercial.
Cool.
Yeah, far too commercial for me.
Well, even pH though, I've heard this was bro science from a Roll It Up article or something, or a forum post, but somebody was saying to have more potassium later in flower, increasing your pH closer to 6.6 in soil, 6.7, to have more of that availability and less on the other side, because your plants aren't going to need as much as the N and the P and more of the K potentially. Now, the whole anecdotal evidence, honestly, that's really what it is for me, because I never did a side-by-side, but I never saw any damage to the plant. So I do think, depending on what media you're using, you can have some swings. I don't think it's going to hurt it. Adjusting it for additional growth or crop steering, I'm not sure if that would be as ideal, but I do know PPM or EC crop steering is high frequency fertigation, and a lot of people do that in commercial grow settings or cash croppers, where they're going to be feeding heavy doses of EC at low rates multiple times per day, and basically force feeding that plant. I think we talked about it recently in an episode when we were out in Vegas. And essentially it's just, like how we have American competitive eating. There's a Japanese dude too. I saw in the comment sections. There's a Japanese competitive eater. He's like the champ. Anywho's, forcing your stomach to be able to take in more. So eating more salad or more greens to stretch your stomach so you can pound back those glizzies. Similar situation is where you're forcing that plant to obtain more food and giving it more at a time in lesser dosages, so that way it can eat more and it can grow more, and you're pushing it more in that crop steering direction. And there's a science to it. I don't do it myself. I'm an organic setup, and I have basic watering for synthetics, but you need to be able to have a way to measure your the moisture in your media, and also your dry back science behind everything. And then you also need to be able to have automated watering multiple times per day. So there's a science behind manipulating the EC and the PPM, but unless you're cash cropping or your commercial grow, or you're smelling like I do, it may not be worth doing, because the differences are pretty, they can be large depending on the cultivar, but what I saw on actual COAs were differences of about 4 to 5% higher in THC, which is big when you're in a commercial setting, and about 2% higher on terpenes, which can be pretty big. So in a quality standpoint, there is areas to gain there, but there's a lot of money to put into that equipment. You're going to be spending thousands to measure it and to be able to feed it that way. So you got to think about the ROI of your time and your dollar if you really want to do this.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me that if you can, give the plant specific nutrients at a specific time while alleviating other nutrients that it doesn't need, that it would utilize the ones that it does. So I see some validity to it, whether it's anecdotal or bro science or what have you. It makes some sense to me. I think one thing we should touch on, which is fairly important, is the meters themselves. I know that when you first buy a meter, a lot of people don't even know that you're supposed to calibrate it. You're supposed to get a constant and calibrate it according to that, and then continuously calibrate it, keep it checked,
once a month, if not
regularly.
more.
And then, not to mention, many of them, if not all of them, I didn't dive too deep. If you may have seen my comprehensive review of the AC Infinity pH pen, a lot of them need to stay hydrated or moist. You need to keep the diode on it moist. A lot of people don't do that either. So I would reckon that a lot of people are getting false readings with the equipment that they're using because it's not properly dialed and or maintained. So it is proper practice to keep the diode moist and regularly calibrate it. So I think that's important to mention.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, the bulb there on the end of the pH meter, it'll dry out. And the amount of pH meters I've gone through, even being moist in the storage solution, which is what they sell.
Yeah, the storage solution here.
Man,
I just do tap water, but if your tap water is hard, that's the thing, is if you're doing this frequently, just like your shower, you just have to clean. You have to literally go with I had a toothbrush that I used, a small toothbrush, and I'd scrub it every so often. I had a Blue Lab when they were still really expensive, and mine crapped out on me. And luckily you can replace the probe, but you can ruin a whole crop by thinking that you're adjusting your pH right and you're lowering it. So I was going at 3.2 at one point in soil because it was so off. And it said it was on, like the check mark for being calibrated said it was there, but it was gunked up, and that's where storage is huge, man, huge for those.
Yeah. So I've had probes dry out. I had to junk the pH meters, unfortunately, because of that. I also tend to see that when it's adjusting, right, you put it in the solution, it starts to adjust, goes down or up or whatever, right? It just takes longer to kind of get to where it is to get that reading. So if you're in a 7.0 storage solution, for example, you pop it into a water solution that's maybe 6.0, takes a little while to kind of dial down and stabilize at it. I feel like over time, it takes longer and longer to get to the actual what it is. I'm waiting minutes in order to, I don't know if it's just my meter really going bad quickly or it seems like the newer meters that are calibrated and are still good, those adjust and get to where it is quicker than probes that are potentially just about to be gone, about to be done.
Yeah, that's why I switched up to the Apera initially. Is I bought 2 different Blue Labs from the grocery store. They replaced the probes, but the amount of time I had to wait for the probe and I had to feed my plants. I bought a pool testing strip, just a simple pimple, and it worked. But again, like at the time, being a caregiver and it was dollars and cents, I couldn't just sacrifice that. It was a big headache for me. And that's what made me veer a little bit more towards switching to want to be the organic side of things. That was the first push when people were like, I've never had pH meter. I don't deal with that. But then I've also got buddies who use, like the pH perfect solutions, we'll say. And those are ones that once you add all the nutrients in, it's dialed right about to where your pH needs to be. And I noticed with Ventana Plant Science, it'll do that. Advanced Nutrients, Dutch Pro would do that. House and Garden does that. There's a lot of brands that'll adjust it for you. But if you're using cocoa, that's when then you have to get the cocoa mix, because then it'll be a little different. And the amount of nutrition that'll be in that will be different from the others. So it boils down to really knowing the science, and you can simplify. You don't have to go this deep. This is like intermediate levels, we'll say, maybe blue belt and growing, but you can simplify the process too. And if you're just trying to do the basic things, you could do the pool strips. You could do, for pH up, let's say, you could do baking soda or lime or like wood ash if it's got potassium carbonate in it.
You can mix Canadian sphagnum peat moss in to get it to go up to make it more
there's another one right there. Citrus juice or vinegar, sulfur, those are all downs. So like you could simplify everything there and just use a pool strip, or you can go with an organic media that has some of these things in it. But if you're not paying attention to it, if you don't know the basics of it, that's what screwed me up in a lot of grows, is thinking that it was this or that, and it was the pH that really messed me up. And it was all me trusting that meter blindly and not calibrating it. That was my long rant of calibration. But man, it's so important. Same with the PPM meters. If you think that you're dialing it in and really the tool you're using is not accurate, build a house with the wrong measurements and see how that works. Same with growing. It's just not gonna hold up.
I was gonna say, if you are a beginner and you are looking, I think a common question is, what range do you stay in, specifically with the PPM or EC? I go by PPM. In my book, there's actually kind of a general range that you can keep in for the different stages of growth, right? Because we know that as the plant's small, it's not going to need as much nutrients or nutrition in the medium as it is when it's larger plant, right? So some people break it down. They target certain PPMs to like a certain PPM range to be in for the different stages of growth. And I just want to name it off here what I have actually within my beginner grow book. Again, these are general ranges. If you stay within the ranges, you should be good, but there is some variance, right? If you have a large plant in flowering, for example, you could potentially go higher than what's recommended here. But long story short, vegetation, well, actually, like week 1, right after sprout, seedling stage, 100 to 250 ppm. This is a 5 scale, right? Well, 500 scale ppm meter. There's a 750 scale ppm meter as well. That's mostly used over in Europe. And I think the 500 is mostly used in the States. And I think the 750 is also mostly used in Australia, if I'm not mistaken. So
I didn't know that. There's 2 different. I didn't know that.
yeah, there's different scales. So, so 500 scale, seedling week 1, 100 to 250 ppm. Weeks 2 to 3, so seedling stage, 300 to 400 ppm. In the vegetation stage, so you're 4 weeks in and beyond, 450 to 700 ppm. Some are going upwards into the 1,000 ppm there. Flowering, first 4 weeks, 750 to 950 ppm, and then flower weeks 5 and beyond, 1,000 to 1,600 ppm. Again, you can go outside those ranges. These are just general ranges that are for beginners that you can kind of target. So you're not going in there blind and you have no idea what you're doing, and then you're overfeeding or you're underfeeding. At least there's something you can kind of go off to begin. And then would be worthy to mention the old school technique of prior to harvest flushing. A lot of people bring the ppm down as much as possible. Some people bring it down to as less than 100 ppm. That's actually mentioned in my book, is people will take that route. To people swear that it either increases terpenes or breaks down the chlorophyll. A lot of debate still on flushing before harvest. We're not going to get into that. I think we have a whole video on that, if I'm not mistaken. We've already talked about that.
If you guys want us to dive deeper into flushing and the plant more, let's hop over on Twitch sometime on a Thursday and do it for a Q&A. That'd be great. Twitch.tv/FromTheStash. Because that's honestly when science keeps evolving. Somebody asked, what science evolves in Chris's recent video? Once we have science to back what our bro science has been, that's the science that evolved. Once somebody who will go and do these tests for us and give us some evidence, like, that's worth the conversation. Even if it's something we feel like we know, I think it's worth the conversation, man. For me, what's crazy, I never have checked my ppm getting like towards the end. I've just looked at what I'm feeding my plant. Like, I'll literally go as low as 300, 400 maybe in latent flower. But now it's weird because then you're looking at an organic plant. So what's the difference there? It's just taking up what it's taking, because you're not going to be measuring your ppm there if you're just watering your nutrient rich soil. So it's like there comes that argument of where the science is for doing these things. Is there an actual science behind the increased end result of quality or production? Or is it just that people are doing this for extra steps? Because I know a lot of the DIY simplified get her done kind of growers are like, all these numbers and all. I don't even have a meter. I've been growing for 20 years. It's dumb. I know Goblin, I don't think he even has a pH meter. Maybe just for his teas, maybe. But Green Goblin, he's been doing organic soil since he started growing, man. I remember I brought him a clone and I'm telling him to do all this wacky jacky stuff. I come back and he's just like, nope, I mixed all these random nasty things. I just water. I'm like, oh, you got to check the water. Nope, just water. It's like, so there's the pros and cons. It's like, do you want to do all these extra things and know all these numbers? And I feel like it's good to know, especially when you see a cultivar that could do better. You're like, what can I do with this one? Maybe I can increase it with a nutrient rich tea or amend it even more, because that's where you can impact those ppms. It may just be within that soil range and it's harder to test with the meter and the liquid base, but you can still increase the food, because again, when you're looking at a range anywhere from 900 to 1600 or even 600 to 1600, depending on the cultivar, not everything is going to react the same to your feeding regimen. So you may want to increase or decrease. And that's where like that mid to late flowering is really where you'll see what the difference is,
Yep. Environmental concerns will also play an impact on your demand from your plant as well. if you are training, heavy training. Typically by the end of towards the end of veg, my parts per million are much higher. I'm in around like 900 because like she's working
hungry.
overtime. She hungry. And yeah. And there's nothing I can add to what Chris said in regards to the parts per million and the range. So that was really good.
I think you bring up a very excellent point, right? You increase the light, increase the CO2, you're going to need to increase the nutrient demand, right? You're going to need to increase the amount of nutrition that you have in the medium because you'll see
talking about this,
start to happen.
Well, like working out and diets, we've literally behind the scenes been talking about this a lot. Like over the past years, I'm editing myself. I'm like, damn, I'm so skinny. And people see me in person, like, you're taller than I realized. I'm like, that's not good. I'm tall and skinny. So I was like, I'm working out all the time. Why am I not seeing any difference? And just like with your plant, if you're putting your plant through more tedious workout, it's going to need more nutrition, and more nutrition be more food. Just like a human, you need to up your calorie intake. If I'm working out all the time, I'm going to need to eat more.
As a human, you also need a balanced pH. Your body needs to be balanced as well. If you can't be too alkalytic or acidic, and if we're not balanced, your immune system can be wing out as well. I've never done such a thing.
Dude, I got a buddy who legitimately will test his urine.
That's crazy
for the alkalinity, and that's why you see companies that sell expensive ass water, and it's alkaline, and people swear by putting lemon in your water and all these different things. And there's science too. Your body having a better pH, you're going to be able to fight things off better, and the alkalinity in your body can help. And it's going to be the same with your plants. If your pH is off, your PPM's off, that plant is not going to thrive. It's not going to be what you saw on the internet when you ordered that genetic. And I feel like that's the big argument for those who don't care about pH or PPM, those who watch this episode and rolled your eyes and dropped in the comments with something negative. There's other people who have different ways of growing, different totes for different folks, and knowing these basic things or intermediate things can make or break your garden. And I hope it's helpful.
I think it's important too to mention as we talk about the demand and the importance of pH and parts per million is to identify like some of the issues that might be attributed to either a too high, too low parts per million or an inaccurate or unbalanced pH. And they can often look very similar. When you have an imbalanced pH, you might have a deficiency or a toxicity based on what range your pH is in. So if it's too high, maybe you're taking in those too much potassium, too much iron. I think iron's on the other side. But anyways, and if it's too low, you're not getting this side. So you could be deficient in some and toxic in other ones. So I find too, trying to identify pH issues along with toxicity issues can be tough. And when I say toxicity issues, I'm referring to a high parts per million or a deficient issue which would be low parts per million. So yeah, trying to identify issues can be tough too when determining between a pH issue, a parts per million issue, a toxicity, a deficiency,
environmental
light
issue.
burn, cold temperatures. Yeah,
that yellowing of the plant, like that's one. If you guys want us to have an episode where we're going for an hour, man, let's see what the comment section of the likes are. If you want us to see a video talking about yellowing and deficiencies and what they may be, because that's like 500 different things, hit the like button, drop in the comment section, let us know.
Yeah, you do bring up some great points, P, on that last note there. But it goes back to kind of organics versus synthetics, right? And I do want to leave this episode here with something that's going to cause some engagement in the chat, if I may. There's a couple clips here that I have that I'd like to play. Shout out to Jeremy from Build a Soil and then Tad Hussey from Kiss Organics. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. They're talking about, does pH matter in living soil? So let me share my screen right here real quick and play it. It's a 1 minute clip from Jeremy and then I think it's a 3 minute clip from Tad.
Does pH matter in my indoor living soil grow? Well, that's a convoluted question, but the short answer is no. And what I mean by that is there's a difference in what pH means when it comes to soil, and I'll explain it as quickly as I can. When you are in hydro, all of your nutrients depend on a certain pH because the nutrients are available in the water. And so pHing your water makes sense because that's the final nutrient solution, and it is where all the nutrients are picked up. In soil, the pH is an accumulation of the calcium, the magnesium, the potassium, the sodium, and all of the other nutrients that are in the soil. Once those add up, it creates a particular pH. Now, if you have a high pH because it's sodium, pHing is not going to do anything. If you have a low pH because there's not enough calcium, pHing the water is not going to do anything. It's more important to address the soil problem that will correct the pH than it is to try and pH your water. That's why we say throw away the pH meter. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value, but it's different in living soil.
So that's Jeremy's take on this. And then we've got somebody else who grows organics that is well known in the industry, Ted Hussey, Kiss Organics. Same day, he fires off this video here talking about does pH matter in living soils. This is from, quick note, this is from his conversation with Dr. Uram Kalpanik. I think I butchered that. It's a podcast clip.
One last question I had for you that was sort of unrelated, but one that I hear debated by growers that I think you could answer fairly readily is this idea of rhizosphere pH and the importance of pH. Some organic growers don't really don't use pH as a tool because they say that the soil's ability and the microbes' ability to buffer is so great that it's less important. However, some of us, like myself, feel that while there is an aspect to that, by optimizing pH in rhizosphere and in the soil, we're allowing for the plant to have less stress and to make these make it easier for the plant to uptake nutrients. What are your thoughts on this, and how do microbes help in sort of that pH and rhizosphere relationship?
Yes, pH is very important. Under high pH, if you really want to absorb, if you really want your plant to absorb enough iron for the chlorophyll to have a good color and photosynthesis in the leaves, please make sure that the pH will not be above 7.5, even lower than that. 6.8 or something like this. If you have a low pH, then your plant will not be able to absorb some of the goodies that is being needed for a good crop. So this is something which should be kept in mind. My recommendation is take a nutrient solution with a high buffer capacity, and that will help you to overcome those situations in the rhizosphere.
So is it safe to say that the rhizosphere, plant rhizosphere interactions and the rhizosphere itself is highly complicated? We are still learning a lot about the soil microbiome in relationship to the rhizosphere. And by having the pH within a range that is more optimal for the plant, all we're doing is making it easier for the plant to access nutrients, which will potentially reduce plant stress and allow it to put more energy into yield and growth and protection. Those sorts of things.
So I wanted to show that because, just to show that there's still debate within the community, whether or not pH is important or not. And I want to pass this question off to the folks in the audience, right? Do you think pH is important in the medium? Do you think it's important to monitor, really, the pH, the PPM, the EC? Do you monitor it? Let us know down in the comments.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
that's
man.
really good. I like what they touched on. I think, honestly, they're both kind of saying the similar thing, but different.
I think this is like, it circles back to my point before when I said that I could probably put that 8.6 water in, but I'm going to dial it down closer to the range it should be in. Because again, I'd rather have the plant work on growth
than you want to work for the plant or have the plant work for itself.
Yeah. Essentially, neither one is wrong. You can do what you want to do. And that's what I love about this is why we do this as a business, as a passion, as my everything, dude. This is my lifestyle because it's so crazy. Man, we could talk about this for years, and there's so many different ways to do it and so many ways that are right, even if you don't agree with it. The end result product, like I've gone to a place and I saw a dude doing biodynamics, burying a horn with weird soil stuff in it during the moons, like just the craziest stuff. If you're into biodynamics, drop it in the comment section because it's a mind-blowing thing. It's interesting. But does it really make your stuff that much better? His product was good, so it's hard to say it, but there's so many ways to do it. I think to knock it is just ignorant. And those are the people who aren't living their life, man. If you're passionate about this, try different things. I got a freaking grow box over here. I'm not getting paid for it. I'm just doing it because I'm interested to see what it does, man. Like I've knocked it for so many years. I did that with organics. I grew a whole run of Headbanger just to say in the end, I wanted to be like, man, I grew up better here. But I was wrong. I was like, wow, okay, it's just as fire and I did no work. This is amazing. I just watered my plant and look at the results. So there's multiple ways to do it. And I think that's the biggest thing. To argue that one's better than the other, that's just ignorance.
Agriculture's been around for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. I don't know the science on it, but we've been perfecting agriculture for almost as long as we've been around. But we only recently have been able to cultivate this plant as widespread as we have been now, and will only continue to grow. So the conversation will continue to change. The science will continue to evolve. Science used to tell us that the world was flat until science told us it wasn't. So it does evolve, and so will the conversation around this plant. Awesome, man. I think people could really gathered something from this today.
Absolutely, man.
It was a great conversation, and I can't wait to see if there's anything we missed or if there's something that you feel like you could add. We want to hear from you, because all three of us read the comments. I probably read the comments more on this damn channel than
I'm going to do it
own.
less.
So put it down. We want to hear from you. Constructive comments, of course, but great conversation. Is there something you guys want to add at the end there?
Just shout out to everybody who's listening, tuning in. Shout out to you fellas. And with that being said, it's your boy Rob, Mr. Groat, Pigeon 420. We'll see you guys next time. Stay lifted.
Peace.
Peace.